Hi, I'm Kristen from Saddlery Solutions, and today in this video we're going to talk about the gullet width on your saddle. And what the gullet width is where the saddle sits over your horse's spine. So we're going to show a little bit about the problems that it can cause if it's not wide enough, as well as how to look at it on your horse. The first picture that I want to show you is actually of your horse's spine. So what we're looking at with the horse's spine is this right here. This is our cervical spine or our neck, our thoracic spine in our back, and our lumbar spine in our low back. Where we're looking at for a saddle is the thoracic spine right here. And what I want you to notice is a couple of things. Number one, we've got this supraspinatus ligament that runs all along the top of our horse's spine. We don't want our saddle interfering with that supraspinatus ligament because that's part of what gives us our bounce and our spring in our horse's spine to get that elevation through their work. The other thing I want you to see is that you've got these little nerve endings that are coming out the side of the spine that we also don't want our saddle to be pinching on. So when we look at those individual spinous process, your supraspinatus ligament runs along the top right here, but what I want you to see is these little arms that stick out the side, and that's actually where our individual vertebra link together down the side of the spine. So we want our saddle to not sit on this center bone, not sit on what's called the multifidus muscle that runs down the side here, not sit on this little facet that sits out the side. We want it to sit out on the outside of these bones so that the saddle's sitting along the top of our horse's rib cage, not in on the spine of the horse. I've used this picture before when we're talking about elevation and lifting up the back. So if our saddle sits too tight to the spine, this bow that needs to come up here, then the horse wants to flatten and drop the spine versus using their spine. And I'm going to kind of show you how that works. So when we're talking about the thoracic spine of the horse, we're talking about our spine from behind the shoulder to the lumbar right here. And when we're talking the width of that spine, the first thing that we do is find the bone in the middle where we can kind of feel the top of those spinous process along here. And then I drag my fingers sideways until I can feel where I fall off the edge of that spine. And so I go from one side, then the other side. And now I know I need about this much space between the panels of my saddle in order to stay off the spine of my horse. This is really important because as we approach the spine of the horse, there's a lot of nerve endings and a lot of sensitivity. So if I'm palpating the outside of her back here, she really couldn't care less about what I'm doing. But when I get in close to the spine, you can see the reaction, the head lifting, the back dropping. And so if our saddle pinches on the side of that multifidus muscle and ligaments and nerves that come out of the spine, it's again going to want to cause our horse to drop their back and hollow versus utilizing themselves. So again, as I come in here, she's like, okay, whatever, I don't care. And then the moment I get close to the spine, you can see this reaction. And again, you've never had a riding lesson where your trainer's like, get your horse more hollow and their head further in the air. And so when I've got a horse that's particularly sore through the mid part of their back right here, one of the things we always check is the space between the panels. And I'm going to show you what I mean by check the space between the panels. So when I'm talking about the gullet of the saddle, what I am talking about is the distance here between the panels all the way from the front to the back. And so what we want to see is we want to see enough space for that spine to have clearance. So remember when we talked about how wide her spine was, she was about this wide. And so we can see with this particular saddle, this is going to be much too narrow on her back. If we look at a different saddle gullet, so if we look at this saddle here, we can see that the width here would be much more appropriate for this horse's spine than the saddle that we were just looking at. And so that's what we're looking from side to side here for our gullet width on our horse. Something to keep in mind with gullet width is you can actually also go too far with it, meaning that you can go too wide between the panels for the horse. And what happens when you go too wide is that then when the rider sits in the saddle can actually collapse and come right down on the horse's spine. I have never in 22 years of fitting saddles met a horse whose spine is wider than the palm of my hand. And I'm talking that's like a Frisian sport horse with a super wide spine. So if the saddle is more than, I would say, 4 inches side to side in the gullet, it's probably too wide. I have never met a horse that's wider than that. Usually, typically, horses are 2 to 3 inches in the width of their spine, and that's about where we want to stay with gullet width. With really high spine thoroughbreds, we have to be extra special careful that the spine doesn't come up inside the saddle and touch the tree along the bottom. So again, when we're talking about gullet width, what we're talking about is how the spine fits in between these two spaces and make sure that your saddle gives ample room for that spine to be comfortable and utilized while you're riding. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can find plenty more on our channel, or you can find us at saddlerysolutions.com.